everyone, it's Caroline or Miss B Overseas, and thank you so much for joining me today. I have once again let 2 months go by without doing a wrap-up of what I've read. So today in this video, you are getting both my June and July wrap-up. There are 12 books that I'm going to talk to you about. Which I get is just like a normal month-long amount of books for a lot of people, but not for me. So I'm feeling a little bit nervous about trying to talk to you about all 12 of these books, especially since some of them I haven't read in a really long time. Also, one thing I want to say before we get into talking about these books, I haven't been star rating books. I've just been reading them and then taking them in and then marking them as read on Goodreads and then just kind of moving on with my life. And I feel like that's really helping me enjoy just the process and physical act of reading more. So I'm not going to include star ratings in this wrap up. Instead, I am going to be more intentional about what I actually say about the books, and hopefully you can just get a sense of how I felt about them based on that and not on the star rating. Starting off, we're going to start with 3 books that I'm actually going to redirect you to other videos to hear my more in-depth thoughts about, and I talk about them a lot more. These 3 books I read for the Sunshine Readathon that is hosted. These are just all turned around, aren't they? The books I read for the Sunshine Readathon that was hosted by Jess over at Jessica Nicole Dickerson. I have 2 vlogs, a part 1 and a part 2 vlog. It was a week-long readathon. I read these 3 books. So I'll go ahead and give you like a quick overview of them now. The first one I read that week was Riot Baby by Tochi and Onyebuchi. This is, as you can see, a very short novella, and I was thinking about it and I was going to describe this as dystopian, but it's really not. Its setting is very much rooted in reality, and I guess the kind of speculative or fantastical part comes in with the powers that this one character has. It's about 2 siblings. One of them, the older sister, has something that they call the Thing, and it's a combination of kind of like telekinetic powers and then also the power to teleport, I guess is what you would call it. And it's just kind of following both of their lives and how they intertwine with one another, how the older sister tries to master these powers and then the younger brother ends up being incarcerated. And Tochi Onyebuchi does so many fantastic things in this. He kind of uses Ella, the older sibling's powers, to talk about power dynamics and how people choose to use power in today's society. It brings up race, it brings up police violence, it brings up incarceration, it brings up just the violence against Black bodies. And it was my first experience reading anything by Onyebuchi, and I'm so glad that I picked this up because I definitely want to continue because the writing style was very intriguing, and just I always appreciate authors that are able to do so much in so little pages. Next up, I read The Sea of Monsters, which is the second in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series by Riordan. This is a middle grade fantastical series about demigods, and I really can't tell you a whole lot about the second book because I don't want to give any spoilers for the first book, and that was a whole spiral I went through in those reading vlogs. But this one has as much fun and adventure and excitement as the first one. I did go into in that vlog about how the first one really just blew me away with how much I loved it. This one, plot-wise, was a bit lacking for me, which really wasn't that big of a deal because the characters were still as brilliant as ever. I just think it kind of fell into a little tiny bit being that like middle of a series book where the plot wasn't necessarily furthered along that much. The way that Riordan chooses to end this is just so good, and I am so excited to pick up the third one and continue in this series. And the final book that I read for the Sunshine Readathon is Long Division by Kiese Laymon. This is a book that I have been anticipating for a while. It's the story, well, it's actually 2 stories kind of intertwined, and the 2 stories kind of travel backwards and forwards through time, but they focus on the same character kind of named City. And initially in the first story, I guess, what kicks it off is that City kind of goes on this use a word in a sentence game show, and on that show he ends up having kind of a rant that goes viral. That kind of sets the conflict off, but then there's also this other kind of story that's going on where City finds a book called Long Division that causes him to kind of go on this time travel journey about different time periods in the Deep South. I'm going to link Jonathan from To Be Black and Be Loved, his review of this book, which I actually found during the vlog. He just says so many things so perfectly in it, and I was so grateful to have found his channel in looking for reviews of this book, so I would highly recommend going to watch his review. He says in his review that this is a love letter to language, and that's the perfect synopsis of this. The language is vibrant and it is whip smart, but the story itself is winding. You can just really tell how much Kiese Laymon poured his own thoughts and feelings into this book, and because that is so apparent, I truly think that this book is so brilliant. So that was everything I read in the Sunshine Readathon. Like I said, my vlogs will be linked. The next category of books that I'm going to move on to is books that were planned intentionally, so they were either on my radar or they were on TBRs, or I just had a reason to be reading them. So I'm gonna start off with The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is an adult horror, and it follows 4 Blackfeet Indian men as they are being haunted by this otherworldly creature because of something that they all did when they were younger, involving hunting on sacred land that they weren't supposed to be hunting on. And I really wish that I had the physical book with me, but I was just reading it so intensely and voraciously on the beach that it just disintegrated and fell apart, because I want to be able to like show you the certain chunks that worked for me and then the certain chunks that didn't. I guess if I could break it up into thirds, the first third I absolutely loved. We're kind of following one character as he descends into madness as this event from his past is haunting him, and that I was just completely gripped by. The middle third kind of lost me a little bit, and the final third, or really like the last, I would say maybe 50 to 60 pages, I have never been so gripped by one kind of sequence in so long. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's basically this basketball game between a character and this otherworldly creature, and I have not been so enthralled by a singular scene in a very long time. So this was kind of my first foyer into the horror genre, and while I still don't know if that genre is for me, I definitely think that Stephen Graham Jones's writing is for me. So I will be picking up more in the horror genre, but it's going to be from him. Next, let's talk about Everything Sad is Untrue, A True Story by Daniel Nayeri. This is an autobiographical novel, and I have a hard time distinguishing between if this is middle grade and young adult. I would say it falls in like the older middle grade, early young adult category, which I wish there was an actual term for, but basically we're following the story of this author as he grows up in Iran, and then eventually how they have to flee the country and end up in a refugee camp, and then they go from that refugee camp to living in Oklahoma as Iranian refugees. So we're kind of getting that story, but then he also intersplices stories about his parents and his grandparents and his ancestors, and kind of just these Persian folkloric tales that tell us more about his heritage, and I was completely blown away. This story is definitely the best storytelling that I've ever read in a book. It is winding and it is layered, and it is just so beautifully and brilliantly crafted. And this was just one of those books that made me, like, do you ever read a book and you finish it and you're like, wow, I am grateful to be a reader. Like, I am grateful to have the ability to witness authors put stories like this into the world. So if you can't tell, I absolutely loved it. It's the best book that I've read so far this year, and I don't know that it's going to be for everyone. The writing is a bit winding. There's no like chapter breaks or anything like that throughout the story, but it's just one that I want everyone to read. It's so brilliant and beautiful. Next up, let's talk about Ace of Spades by Faridah Àbíké-Íyímídé. This was one of, if not my most anticipated 2021 release. And the story switches back and forth perspectives between these two students that are seniors, and they're the only Black students at this very elite preparatory school, and both of the characters have had very different lives and experiences at this school. Their lives are kind of forced together when these anonymous text messages start going out that are revealing very harmful secrets that both of these characters have been keeping. So this one was actually a very interesting reading experience for me, and I think a large reason of why I didn't love it as much as I thought I was going to was I read it too slowly. Like, I wish that I would have just had the time to sit down and read the whole thing cover to cover, but just my life didn't allow for that. I will say that for the first half, I was completely enthralled. Like, the writing was so gripping, and I also think that this confirms that for me, I'm always so taken with the idea of mysteries, and I love the part in a mystery plotline where just no one knows what's going on. Just a bunch of mysterious things keep happening. So for the first half of this, obviously there's the text messages that are kind of going on, but also the two characters are kind of dealing with repressed memories that are going on as well, and just kind of no one really knows what's going on, and that for me was so gripping. And then the second half kind of wasn't as great for me as the first half was, but that's because the two characters kind of come together and they start actually trying to figure out what's going on, both with their repressed memory and then also with this anonymous texter. And that's not any fault of the book or of the author. That's definitely just a preference that I have. This book brings up and explores so many important things revolving around identity and sexuality and race and power dynamic. Whereas I would highly recommend it. Like, this is definitely going to be one that students will eat up. It's just not quite the reading experience that I was hoping for. But again, not the fault of the book, definitely just my preferences influencing my reading experiences. Next, let's talk about Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Okay. Synopsis for this one, it's about this man who initially at the beginning of the story has a wife that he loves and a son that he loves and is living a theoretically normal life when an incident occurs where he gets kidnapped and then drugged, and when he wakes up, he is in this world where he is a world-renowned scientist and his wife is not his wife. He does not have a son. And really, I mean, I've heard that synopsis a million times before, and I'm sure that you have as well. This is a fairly popular and backlist title. I thought after hearing that synopsis that the majority of the story was going to follow that main character as he kind of tries to figure out that world that he wakes up in, and really that's not the direction that the story goes. We follow this main character as he explores several different more worlds and realities, and that's just something that I'm coming to discover that I really love reading about in books. I don't know if it's a trope or a plot point or what you call it, but the idea of multiverses and multiple selves and just like what could have been if you were living in a different reality or would have made a different decision. This book was so completely enthralling. I read it in about 3 sittings. The ending was completely, I want to use the word thrilling, and it's so hard. I was talking about this. I like posted something about it on Instagram, and I said like, oh, I'm trying to, you know, give the adult thriller genre another try because I don't have a whole lot of luck in that genre. And several people responded and said, oh, you know, I love that book. I wouldn't really call it a thriller, but what would you call this if not a thriller? Aren't the only criteria for thrillers is that they're thrilling? This is a thriller. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox about that. This, I think, was a 5-star prediction for me, and if I were star rating books right now, this would definitely get a 5 stars. So gripping. I loved it. Okay, and then the last book for this kind of planned reads category is Solutions and Other Problems by Allie Brosh. This is a collection of memoir style essays and musings and just snippets from this author's life, but it's told in her signature art style. So it's like a graphic novel format, but it is, I mean, it falls under that kind of memoir category. And this was a complete surprise in how much I loved it. I'm not a big graphic novel person. I think that I get too overstimulated by them, but something about this art style, it wasn't overwhelming, and I like knew where to look on the page. Also, this was one of those stories that just always constitutes like a thumbs up book for me, where it made me cry and it made me hurt, but then the next page it would have me laughing out loud hysterically when I'm on my own, and that's just something that I've grown to really appreciate in books. In this, when she's talking about her life, she brings up topics of grief and loneliness and neglect, kind of like self-neglect and loss of a loved one. But then there's also just these kind of really awesome anecdotes from her childhood and these weird snippets from her adulthood and growing up. I really, really loved this. It makes me so happy to see authors telling their life story in the format that they're passionate about. So kind of like with Everything Sad is Untrue, this kind of winding storytelling that Daniel Nayeri is so good at, and yet he's telling us his life story. And then kind of a similar thing with this, in that Allie Brosh is telling us stories from her life, but she's doing it in her passion, which is this kind of art style that she has. Just really beautiful and amazing. Okay, and then the last category of books that I'm gonna talk to you about is not like a real category. It's just like if the last one was planned books, these were unplanned. I picked them up on a whim just because they were there. So the first one I'm gonna talk to you about is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie Mackesy. I think it's Mackesy. This is an illustrated, I want to say just kind of collection of good and uplifting and warm thoughts that are kind of loosely tied together by this simple story of a boy who meets a mole and a fox and a horse. My mother loves this book. She's been buying copies for everyone that's just kind of important to her in her life, and so I ended up reading it. I definitely see why this kind of collection and this kind of story would be so just kind of healing, especially after the past year or two. I know that this has had a profound impact on so many people who have read it. I thought that it was very nice. To me, it really read more just as like kind of a collection of inspirational quotes, which is something that I love. There's singular pages that had these kind of just musings where, combined with the author's illustrations, were really, really profound. I mean, it was short, it was lovely, and like it's something that I don't regret reading at all. It's just not something I think that had as big of an impact on me as other people may have found it impactful. What a sentence that was that I just said. Okay, my next unplanned read was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This was unplanned in that I started watching Anne with an E and completely spiraled down that rabbit hole, and I was so in love with that television show. So much so that it caused me to pick up the classic childhood tale that I just never read when I was a child, and this was so pleasantly surprising just because I thought when watching that show that there was no way that I was going to love the book as much as I love the show, because in my head I was like, oh, they're putting new modern spins and takes on the show and that's why I love it. But there is just as much kind of modern day thinking from L.M. Montgomery in the ideas and the thoughts that Anne has throughout this book. Anne is such a magnificent character, and definitely a character that I wish that I would have had when I was younger. In addition to the fantastic characters of Anne and Diana and Gilbert and the Cuthbert siblings, the descriptions of nature in here, so beautiful. Like, just really transport you, and I really love when authors do that, particularly when it's not like a fantasy setting. I always love when it's a real world setting and I can still be transported to another magical place. So this was really, really fantastic, and I didn't realize that this kind of follows Anne into adulthood, and then there's more books that follow her kind of in her young adulthood, which I definitely think that I'm going to be picking up. So thank you, L.M. Montgomery, for writing classics that I actually adore and love and want to continue in. Next book, now that I'm thinking about it, is in the wrong category. I had planned to read this. This was on my June TBR, I believe, so it's in the wrong category. Please don't fault me for it. This is a young adult contemporary. It focuses on a teenager who at the beginning comes out as non-binary to their parents, and their parents do not take to that well and kick them out of their house, and they end up going to live with their sister that they have not spoken to in years and years and years. And the story just kind of follows their life as they navigate coming out as non-binary and their identity, especially when it comes to being at a new school and meeting new people. And this is one of, I think, the only straightforward young adult contemporary books that I've read in a really, really long time. And I was pleasantly refreshed and surprised by this book. It didn't necessarily do anything spectacular, but it was just a really pleasant story to be inside. I'm not sure why pleasant is the word that I keep on using. I really appreciated some of the things that the author did in keeping events realistic. I think that what happens with Ben, the main character, and their parents is extremely realistic. I really loved the relationship and friendship that blossoms throughout the course of the book between Ben and Nathan, and yeah, this was just a breath of fresh air. I don't read many straightforward YA contemporaries, but this was one that I was glad to have read. All right, and we've reached the final book of this wrap up that actually does fit in the category of kind of unplanned books, which is The Remarkable Journey of Coyote Sunrise by Dan Gemeinhart. This was a book that I actually read over the course of several months. It's the book that I would read in class while my students were independent reading if I wasn't individually conferencing with students. This was the book that I would read sometimes when my students were independent reading, and talk about a stunning middle grade. This story focuses on our main character, Coyote, who for the past couple of years of her life has been living non-traditionally, in that she is living in a renovated school bus with her father. And throughout the story, they kind of pick up different passengers as Coyote is trying to make it back to her hometown, which is very difficult for both her and her father because it holds a lot of grief and trauma. Just Dan Gemeinhart, this is my second of his, and when I say that he writes these stories that are larger than life and these characters that are so beautiful with these poignant moments. This is a book that I ended up finishing on my plane ride back from Dubai to Arizona, and when I tell you that there were just moments in the last quarter of this book and really all throughout that, whether I was sitting in front of students or sitting in front of strangers on a plane, where I had to choke back tears, and then on the plane I just let the tears loose because I couldn't be bothered to hold them back. Wonderful exploration of grief and family. Also just a really stunning example of how others can impact and influence your own life, and I absolutely love this. Probably one of my favorite middle grades that I've ever read. Okay, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed this wrap up where I tried to explain to you my feelings without doing star ratings, and also explain to you what happened in books that I haven't read for many, many weeks now. Please let me know your opinion on star rating. I know that that's kind of like a hot topic discussion always kind of in the book community, but I do a good job at conveying my thoughts and feelings about these books even without a star rating. Maybe I'll go back eventually, I'm not exactly sure, but wherever you are, whether you star rate or not, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you again very, very soon. Goodbye!